Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It's funny how you can know someone for years, decades even, and think you have them all figured out. My brother-in-law, David, Sarah's husband, well, I'd always seen him as solid. Dependable, yes, but maybe a little predictable. Quiet. He was the steady background hum to my sister Sarah's vibrant melody. Good man, great provider, loved my sister fiercely. Anyone could see that. But deep, emotional? That wasn't the David I thought I knew. He was more comfortable talking about engine oil than feelings, more likely to fix a leaky faucet than offer a shoulder to cry on, though he'd probably do that too if pressed, albeit awkwardly. We got along fine. You know, the way in-laws do. Holiday dinners, birthday parties, the occasional barbecue. Polite conversation, shared family news, the comfortable rhythm of people connected by marriage rather than direct choice. I certainly never disliked him. Not at all. I respected him, but I can't say I felt particularly close. There was always a sort of polite distance, a boundary neither of us seemed inclined to cross. He was Sarah's husband, dad to my niece and nephew, and that was the box I kept him in. Until that weekend at the old lake cabin. The weekend, everything sort of shifted. The cabin had belonged to Sarah's and my parents. Tucked away in the pines beside a quiet, glassy lake, it was rustic, bordering on dilapidated, but crammed full of memories. Summers spent swimming, winters huddled by the fieldstone fireplace. After Mom and Dad passed, Sarah and I inherited it jointly. We tried to keep it up, but life, jobs, kids, it got harder each year. This year, though, we'd sworn we'd tackle the big stuff, replacing the rotting deck boards. Sarah, bless her heart, had organized it all, me, her, David, and our kids, if they could tear themselves away from their own lives. As it turned out, only my nephew, Ben, could make it. My own daughter had a work conflict. So it was me, Sarah, David, and Ben heading up for a long weekend of hard labor, promising ourselves rewarding evenings by the water. The drive up was typical. Sarah chattered. David drove with quiet concentration, occasionally adding a dry comment that made Sarah laugh. Ben was plugged into his headphones in the back. I mostly looked out the window, lost in thought, enjoying the familiar scenery scrolling by. The air grew cooler, scented with pine, as we climbed higher into the hills. The tension, if you could call it that, was the usual low-grade hum of managing family expectations and the looming physical work. David, as always, seemed ready to just get on with it. He was the practical one, the doer. I figured he'd be directing the deck repairs while Sarah and I handled supplies and meals. That was the usual dynamic. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The cabin smelled of dust, wood smoke, and memories, while Sarah and Ben started airing the place out. David immediately went to inspect the deck. I followed him out, more out of a sense of obligation than anything else. The wooden structure sagged precariously, railings loose, several planks clearly rotten through. "It's worse than I thought, Martha," he said, his voice low, serious. He poked a particularly soft spot with the toe of his boot, and the wood crumbled. This isn't just replacing a few boards. The whole substructure might be compromised. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture I recognized as his version of stressed. Usually, he'd just square his shoulders and tackle the problem. This felt different. There was a weariness in his stance I hadn't noticed before. "Might take longer than a weekend," he added, looking not at me, but out over the placid lake, its surface reflecting the tall pines and the bruised colors of the setting sun. That was the first flicker. The first tiny crack in my perception of David the Unflappable. He sounded vulnerable, just for a second. Then he straightened up. Well, let's unload the truck. Get the tools sorted for tomorrow. Back to business. But that brief moment lingered in my mind as we hauled coolers, toolboxes, and bags into the musty cabin. The stage was set, though I didn't know it yet, for seeing my brother-in-law in a completely different light. Saturday dawned bright and clear, deceptively beautiful. The air was crisp, the lake sparkled, birdsong filled the woods. Perfect weather for backbreaking labor. David was already up, coffee brewed, poring over some rough sketches he'd made on a napkin. He had that focused look he got when tackling a problem. Ben, eager despite his youth, was ready to be David's apprentice. Sarah was organizing the kitchen, humming. It felt normal, productive. David directed Ben with quiet patience, showing him how to pry up the old boards carefully, how to check the joists underneath. I shuttled tools, brought them water, helped clear away the debris. It was hard work. The sun climbed higher, beating down on us. Sweat dripped. Muscles began to ache. Around lunchtime, as David was assessing a particularly troublesome joist underneath the deck, disaster struck. Or rather, near disaster. He was lying on his back, trying to get leverage, when the temporary support beam they'd rigged up slipped. There was a sickening crunch of wood, a sharp cry from David, and then silence. My heart leaped into my throat. Sarah screamed his name from the kitchen doorway. Ben, white as a sheet, scrambled towards the edge of the deck. I got there first, peering into the shadowed space underneath. David was lying unnaturally still, pinned by the heavy beam across his legs. His eyes were closed, his face contorted in pain. David, talk to me. I yelled, my voice trembling. Sarah was beside me now, sobbing. Ben looked paralyzed with fear. For a moment, nobody moved. It felt like the world stopped. Then David's eyes flickered open. He grimaced. Okay, he rasped, his voice tight with pain. Okay, don't panic. Sarah, honey, I'm okay. Just stuck. But he didn't look okay. His breathing was shallow. I could see sweat beading on his forehead, despite the shade. My own panic threatened to rise, but seeing Sarah's distress and Ben's fear, something else took over. Calmness, focus. We needed to lift that beam. It looked impossibly heavy. Ben, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, we need the long crowbar. And that thick plank over there. We need leverage. Ben snapped into action, fetching the tools. Sarah was trying to soothe David, her voice choked with tears. It hurts, Sarah, he admitted, a raw honesty in his voice I'd never heard. My leg, I think it's bad. Working together, Ben and I managed to wedge the plank under one end of the beam and use the crowbar as a lever. It took every ounce of strength we had. I could feel my muscles screaming, my hands shaking. Ben grunted with the effort, his young face determined. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the beam lifted just enough. Now, David, slide out. Quick. I urged. He gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face, and somehow pulled himself free, dragging his injured leg. He collapsed onto the dusty ground beside the deck, gasping. His left pant leg was torn, and beneath it, his shin was already swelling, unnaturally angled. Broken, definitely broken. Sarah knelt beside him, frantic. We need to call 911. But there was barely any cell service up here. We knew that. Maybe one bar. If you stood by the water's edge on a clear day, David looked up at me, his eyes locking with mine. The pain was clear, but underneath it, something else. Resignation? Fear? And then, unbelievably, a small, wry smile touched his lips. Well, Martha, he said, his voice still rough. Guess the deck repair is officially on hold. In that moment, lying there injured, stripped of his usual competence, relying on us, I didn't see David the capable provider, David the quiet fixer. I saw a man in pain, vulnerable, yet still trying to ease the fear of those around him with a touch of humor. It was a side of him completely new to me, and it resonated deep within my chest. The barrier of polite distance didn't just crack, it crumbled. Getting David out of there was an ordeal. There was no way he could walk, and the nearest hospital was over an hour's drive away, assuming we could even get a signal to call for help or advice. The old truck wasn't exactly equipped for medical transport. Sarah was beside herself, alternating between tears and frantic attempts to make David comfortable, her usual competence dissolving in panic. Ben was quiet, clearly shaken, but doing his best to be helpful. And David, well, David was trying to manage the pain, his face pale and tight, but his focus seemed to be more on calming Sarah down than on his own considerable discomfort. "Sarah, honey, breathe," he kept saying, reaching out a hand to grasp hers. "It's just a broken leg. Annoying, but not the end of the world. We'll figure it out." He looked over at me, then a silent communication passing between us. We needed a plan. Someone had to stay calm. It seemed, unexpectedly, that role fell to me. While Sarah fussed with pillows and blankets, I took Ben aside. "Okay, Ben, we need to try and get a signal. Take my phone, walk down to the point by the big rock. If you get even one bar, call 911. Tell them what happened, our location. If you can't get through, come right back." He nodded, his young face serious, and set off. Then I turned my attention back to David. Kneeling beside him, I asked gently, "What can I do, David? How bad is the pain?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time. The usual guardedness was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. "It's pretty bad, Martha. Sharp, deep." He tried to shift slightly and winced, sucking in a breath. "Don't let Sarah worry too much. She hates seeing anyone hurt." This concern for my sister, even while he was clearly suffering, struck me. It wasn't just duty, it was deep affection, a protective instinct laid bare by the situation. "She loves you, David. Of course she's worried." I said softly, "We both are." We needed to splint his leg, somehow, before attempting to move him. I remembered some basic first aid from years ago. I found some relatively straight pieces of scrap, wood from the old deck, and tore strips from an old bedsheet Sarah found in the linen closet. As I worked, carefully trying to immobilize his lower leg without causing more pain, David watched me, his expression unreadable. "You're good at this," he murmured after a while. "Steady hands. Just trying to help," I replied, concentrating on tying the knots. "Seems like you're usually the one doing the helping." He gave another one of those small, wry smiles. "Roles reversed today, I guess." The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was filled with the weight of the situation, the shared understanding of his pain, and our predicament. Sarah hovered nearby, fetching water, offering encouragement, her anxiety a palpable thing in the air. Ben returned, crestfallen. "No signal, Aunt Martha. Not even a flicker." My heart sank. Okay, plan B. We couldn't wait here indefinitely. We had to get him to the truck and drive him out ourselves. Moving him was going to be excruciating for him and difficult for us. We fashioned a makeshift stretcher using an old canvas tarp and some sturdy branches, getting him onto it, then lifting and carrying him across the uneven ground to where the truck was parked, took all three of us, me, Sarah, and Ben. David bore it with stoic silence for the most part, though occasional sharp intakes of breath and the tightening of his jaw betrayed the agony he was in. Sarah cried quietly, Ben strained with the effort, his face grim. I found myself coordinating, giving quiet instructions, trying to keep the movement as smooth as possible. Throughout it all, whenever his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of gratitude, of trust that felt incredibly profound. We weren't just in-laws navigating a crisis. We were two people relying on each other in a way we never had before. By the time we finally got him settled as comfortably as possible in the back seat of the truck, propped up with pillows, the sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery colors that seemed to mock our situation. The intimate space of the truck cab, the shared ordeal, the raw emotion of the day. It had stripped away the years of polite formality, leaving something bare and unexpectedly real. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Sarah drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her eyes darting anxiously between the winding dirt road and the rearview mirror, checking on David. Ben sat beside her, quiet, staring straight ahead. I sat in the back with David, trying to keep his legs steady, offering sips of water, making quiet conversation to distract him, though mostly we sat in a companionable silence, punctuated by his occasional pained sighs. The truck bounced and jostled on the uneven track leading out from the cabin, each bump eliciting a wince from David. I felt a strange mix of worry, responsibility, and an unexpected closeness to him. Seeing him like this, injured, dependent, yet still trying to minimize Sarah's distress, chipped away the last vestiges of the predictable David I thought I knew. He wasn't just stoic, he was deeply considerate. He wasn't just quiet, he held his pain internally, perhaps to spare others. "How are you doing?" I asked softly during a relatively smooth stretch of road. He turned his head slightly on the pillow, his eyes finding mine in the dimming light filtering through the dusty rear window. "Been better," he admitted with a faint smile. "But I'll survive. Thanks to you guys." He paused, then added, his voice lower, more serious, "Especially you, Martha. You really kept it together back there. Don't know what we'd have done." He trailed off, but the sentiment hung in the air. It wasn't effusive praise, wasn't his style, but it was genuine, heartfelt, and it landed with surprising weight. I felt a warmth spread through me, a connection forged in the crucible of the afternoon's events.